Welcome back to Everyday Holiness, a Faith ND podcast brought to you by the Notre Dame Alumni Association. This is again your host, Dan Allen, Associate Director of Spirituality and Service, and we're glad to have you with us for this episode. And I'm glad to have with me today Mike Griffin and Jessica Thomas. Mike is the provost next door to us here at Holy Cross College. He's also a triple domer, a BA in 93, an MDiv in 04, and a PhD in 2014. And Jessica is on staff here at the university as an instructor in the university writing program. They are a married couple, and we're going to get into the unique way that they came together as a family. But first of all, I want to say welcome both to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Dan.
All right. Well, maybe Jessica, we'll start with you. Could you tell us about some of your origins and early years to give us a shape of where you're from and all that?
Sure. I grew up in Greenwood, Indiana, and had a unique family situation. I was raised in a house where they called me the little bird in the big nest. So I was with my grandparents, my two aunts, and my mother. My mom got unexpectedly pregnant when she was 20, and the story goes that my grandma went to a garage sale and bought a crib. Everyone said, well, I guess that means we're keeping the baby.
Wow.
So so I had a lot of love and a lot of activity, and I have great memories of being in our pool growing up. And so I am an only child. I went to Our Lady of the Greenwood until 8th grade. And every Lent, I have these memories of going to our cafeteria for the fish fry on Fridays and thinking I was just here for lunch. Why do I have to come back?
Smell hits you before you get in the door, right?
Exactly, with the pouch of milk. So yeah, that's kind of the short version of my childhood.
And how did that affect your faith growing up in this atypical environment and your understanding of God? How did you make sense of some of those things?
Yeah. I have some interesting memories of, I always went to 7:30 Mass with my grandparents. Mm-hmm. My grandma was the faith leader at our house. Our Catholic faith was so embedded. Our family is from St. Louis, and we have these pictures of there was a family where there were 13 kids, and 8 became sisters and 2 became priests.
Wow. And
so we had one of those sisters did a needle point of the Sacred Heart, and that was in our hallway growing up with the palms from the most recent Palm Sunday. And it was just something that it was something that we did, but it was more of this is who we are. Mm-hmm. This is where we come from. And I didn't always love it. I did not love going to Mass at 7:30. I did not love that when I spent the night at a friend's house, my grandparents were like, well, you need to be ready at 7 a.m. for Mass.
Wow, okay.
And so I had to be out there with my outfit on.
A little later Masses?
I know, it was 7:30. So yeah, it was just, there were artifacts all over the house, but my grandma just spoke about faith in a way that was contagious.
Yeah, that's a blessing for sure to have a person like that in your life. As you grew older and talked to your mom about this significant detour in her life to have you as a child, what did you come to know and appreciate about the sacrifices that she made for you during that time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That didn't really even happen until recently. Mm-hmm. That my grandma passed away from cancer 4 months before I married my late husband. So she died in March of 2009, okay. And I got married to Jeff in July of 2009. And I feel like I always felt cheated. And I know you asked my mom, but this kind of leads up to that. I always felt a little cheated because I feel like at a certain point, a woman starts to understand her mother as this separate person and being. Yeah. And I feel like I was just getting there with my grandma. Mm. And I wish so often that I could talk to her. My mom, it was a little bit different because she has some unique challenges that make understanding where she was coming from more difficult. But I feel like I've gotten there through a number of ways. And I think, I'm to the point where I can appreciate, especially as a mother and as a woman, how scary that must have been, mm-hmm. and how brave it was to have me, and how difficult it must have been to parent me with her 2 sisters and her mother and her father right there. I know I love it when our family comes and visits, but I'm always glad when they leave. And I know that everybody you need your own space.
Yeah. We love you, but you can go home now.
Yeah, I know. Yes, please. And so I can appreciate how that must have been very hard and taken a lot of courage. And she was only 20. Like when I was 20,
Right.
I mean, I thought I knew everything. And now that I'm over 40, I'm like, I wouldn't trade age for youth any day.
Yeah.
I am so grateful to be able to age. And with all of the uncertainty that comes with it, is such a blessing to be able to see the world so much bigger than what I thought it was.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your candor in that and vulnerability in that. Thank you very much. I think what I appreciate about some of these stories on the podcast is they're very raw and real, and we find that God enters into our messiness and into our less than ideal experiences. And not everybody has this idyllic childhood, and yet you probably have a perspective that's more wise, wise beyond your years than a lot of people who may have grown up in sort of oblivious to some of the hardship and suffering in the world. So I think it's very helpful that you're sharing that with us. Mike, I'll turn to you. If you could do the same, give us a sense of your early years and all those things.
Yeah, thanks. And I experienced freshly, like just hearing Jess talk about her childhood, the gift of being able to know her and being married to her. It's really, the courage is really incredible. And interestingly, my childhood, her family roots are in St. Louis, but then they moved away, and my whole childhood and family are St. Louisans, so that kind of dominates my family growing up. So I guess probably the biggest sort of feature of growing up was I'm the youngest of 8 kids.
Okay.
And all of us were still alive, and so being from a big family was just part of my identity from an early age, and being the youngest, and also very different than growing up going to 7:30 a.m. Mass. We would often go to the noon Mass and be late for that. Right. But similar in some ways, the faith leader in our family was my mom. She was kind of the leader of most things, and that was a big formative influence on me. And I think another interesting thing about, obviously there's so much to say about our childhood, one thing that sort of dominated my childhood was my mom's older brother was the congressman for our area. So we were a very political family. And so I always grew up kind of wanting to be in his footsteps a little bit. And we spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. And then I think for me, a big moment was when my dream school, which was, I hate to say it, but was Georgetown, did not share my dream.
You were part of their dream, huh?
And you think, oh gosh, that was a big moment. And so I was obviously, though, super excited to come to Notre Dame. And that's when I think I really saw that the 2 big influences in my life growing up, Catholicism, the church, which was for me always a very social experience, that our faith is kind of done together, and then this kind of emphasis on politics and even, you might say, kind of social justice. That Notre Dame, that's where those streams came together for me. So so I'm obviously still, as a big family, still very close, and my mom and dad have died, but everyone is still in St. Louis, and I'm up here at South Bend.
Right. Down I-55.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
As you came to grow into young adulthood and you think, okay, maybe I want to get into politics or other things, my faith is here. Yeah. What did you start to understand about some of your unique gifts that God had given you that helped point you towards the future?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, it was the call to teaching. I'll never forget a long debate with my rector in Morrissey Manor about whether you could do more good in the world being in Congress or leading a district or leading a classroom.
Okay.
And I was sort of apoplectic that he was trying to say, no, clearly it's in the classroom, teaching people. Yeah. And that kind of took hold, because then it was really after, when I graduated, I went to Washington, D.C., and the first year I really tried to combine the two. The legendary Father Dick Warner set up an internship for me at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops doing public policy. It was actually some of the early days of looking at the benefit of Catholic schools for low-income kids in inner cities, kind of the beginning of the school choice movement. And so that year, I knew, though, my faith had become more and more important to me, and Catholic schools and Catholic education was really important. So I lived with a group of 11 other just recent college grads in the program that was actually the precursor to ACE. It was the Washington Teacher Service Corps. And I wasn't teaching, but then I kind of caught the bug there. And then the next year I started teaching at a Holy Cross Brothers High School in D.C., Bishop McNamara. So at that point, the teaching then really, that's when I discovered that was a gift. And then the rest of my life has been in, not just in working in the church, but in Catholic education. So that was, ironically, I did go to Washington, D.C., but it was to deepen the ministry in Catholic schools, not in the halls of power.
A different hall of power.
I guess
That's right.
so, yeah.
That's right.
I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure have touched so many lives over the course of your career. Jess, for you, what was your journey to higher education, and also, again, understanding some of the gifts that you had been blessed with?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so this is really where I felt, for the first time, like God at work in my life. So I was really good at math and science in high school. And so my teacher said you should be an engineer. And when you live in Indiana, there's one engineering school you typically
Purdue,
apply
right?
to. I hate to say it. So,
We're friends.
Yeah. So I had a great undergraduate experience at Purdue, but realized very early that there's a difference between being able to do something and loving to do it. And I just did not love engineering. So I switched majors to what seemed the most natural thing in the world, which was communications. And anyone who knows me would understand why that was very natural. And then I accidentally double majored in English because I just kept taking electives in English. And junior year, my counselor was like, if you just take a couple more, you'll have a double major. So then it was like my dream job to work for Procter & Gamble. And I finally got an interview. And there were 3 responses the interviewer told me that I could get. One was, you're a fit, great. One was, you're a good fit, but not for this position. And one was, you're just really not a good fit for this company.
Yeah.
Around that same time, I had felt like maybe, and so this was after I graduated, I felt like maybe I should be a teacher. And so I looked into transition to teaching programs. I had been working in marketing, and I, again, just did not feel in love with my work. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to look into this transition teaching program at what was then IUPUI. I think it's just IU Indy now. And it just seemed like one door opened and one door opened and another door opened. And then I got this interview at Procter & Gamble, and I really felt like I was at a crossroads. And so I did the interview with Procter & Gamble, and I got the last response, which was, you're really not a good fit for this company.
Also not a part of their dreams, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it just was so, if you had told me in high school that I was going to be an educator, I would have thought you were putting bamboo shoots up my fingernails. Okay. It just sounded like nothing that I wanted to do. And it just felt like that's where God wanted me to be. And it was like all these kind of small accidents, accidentally double majoring in English, like always having this love of literacy. And then I student taught, and I was like pretty good at it. And then I worked at Fishers High School in Fishers, Indiana for a couple of years. And then when Jeff and I got married, I got a job at Mattia Valley High School in the Chicago suburbs. And Jeff and I lived there. He was a construction engineer, so he did share Purdue's love of engineering. And so while Mike's work is in Catholic education, most of my career has been in public education.
Okay.
And so it's interesting, our conversations. That's one of the reasons I fell in love with Mike, was talking about teaching.
Yeah.
So then I taught high school English for 15, 16, 17 years.
Wow.
And then I was the English department chair for 3 years. I became the department chair in 2019, and that was not a great year to become a high school administrator because 2020, teaching a department of 24 teachers to learn to teach on Zoom. Every kid in high school takes English, and there just was not enough empathy to go around and compassion. And then when Mike and I got married, we made the decision to come here. And so my kids and I moved here. And luckily, a friend took my resume to Patrick Klaus at the Writing Center. And here I am.
Here we are. That's great. We'll definitely get into some of those chapters. I want to go back to that point that you made, that sometimes when people are discerning their future, it looks very murky. and a certain particular thing like teaching seems like there's no way I would do that. But it's only with the gift of hindsight and looking back to see where God was moving in your life that you sort of realize, okay, this makes a lot more sense now. And I think it's encouraging maybe to people who are still discerning their vocations in future to know that you're not going to get all the answers at once, but they will come over time.
Mm-hmm.
So you've mentioned your late husband, Jeff, a couple of times. So let's get to that portion of things. How did you meet your husband? And then over the course, share with us kind of the developments within your marriage and his life.
Sure. So I can also speak to, I feel like Jeff came into my life. Also, in college, I really didn't go to church. It was not a priority for me. And so I'll connect back to that in a second. But Jeff and I met, we were both tour guides for the Office of Admissions. And so we knew each other. I think I met him when I was 19, and we kind of knew of each other. Anyways, we always used to joke that our kids would never know the full story of how we got together because he would like me, and then I didn't like him back, and then I would like him, and he didn't like me back. And so this went on all of college.
Right.
And then after college, finally the timing was right. So we started dating in 2005, and we got married in 2009. And Jeff approached his faith with such discipline. So, Jeff was in a fraternity, and the joke goes that he got out of cleaning because he would go to mass on Sunday nights. And so whether or not it was truly for the right reasons,
God works in many ways, right?
He definitely, faith was still a part of his undergraduate experience. And actually his best friend, who was the best man in our wedding, they would go to mass together. And when we got married, we were doing pre-Cana, and I remember Monsignor looking at Jeff and saying, what his role was in our spiritual lives as a family. Mm-hmm. And I swear it was he took mental notes and took that very seriously. Mm-hmm. I remember going to a wedding one New Year's Eve in Chicago, and it was a Catholic service, but they didn't do the full mass. So there was no communion.
Yeah.
So in between the mass and the reception, Jeff was like, well, we need to go to mass.
Holy day of obligation,
or we need
right?
to go tomorrow. And I was like, are you kidding me? I am in heels and it's Chicago in the winter. I have open-toed heels. Don't you know what that means? Yeah. He's like, well, you don't have to go, but I'm going. It's okay. So, and I'll never forget, we went to mass at Holy Name Cathedral, and literally the whole homily was keep God in the mix in 2006. And we could not believe it. So every year on New Year's Eve, we'd be like, you're going to heaven in 2007. We would make it up.
And then some children came along, but also some sickness came along.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So Jake came along in 2014, and then Kate came along in 2016, and then we had kind of a year of normalcy in 2017, and then in 2018, again, like you were saying, hindsight, I can see all the pieces now. Jeff, in January, Jeff started not sleeping well. Mm-hmm. And then he started complaining of the shoulder pain, and he even went and got a scan of his shoulder, and they were like, no, nothing's wrong with your shoulder. And then that was in March. And then in April, we went out to breakfast one Saturday, and he said, do my eyes look yellow to you? And I was kind of in denial. I was like, no, you look fine. You look fine. And then we went to his sister's house on the way home, and he said, do my eyes look yellow to you? And she was like, yeah, you need to go get that looked at. And so I took Jake and Kate home, and he went to the urgent care, and they said, there's something more going on here. And so he went to the hospital, and that kind of started a 3-week process of trying to figure out what was going on. Initially, we thought it wasn't a big deal, and then it ended up it was a very, very big deal. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So he was diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma April 28th, 2018. So on Kate's second birthday, he was really yellow, and his skin was yellow, and he was very itchy because his bilirubin, which is supposed to be, your bilirubin is, I think, usually between 3 is high, between 1 and 3.
Right.
His was at 32.
Wow.
And he was just miserable.
Yeah.
And that was because the cancer had clogged his bile ducts, and yeah.
That's so hard to hear, and as we'll find out, it plays a role in both of your stories. So we'll pause there. If we could, I'll come back to you, Mike. You talked about teaching being an important part of your life, but also you found yourself called to marriage. So give us that chapter, if you would, please.
Yeah. Well, yeah, a couple of chapters. Boy, you just sit here like hearing, like listening to each other's story. It's just like the saturation of like events and life. And yeah, it's actually a kind of a blessing to walk through it, because then you can see like, yeah, there's the deeper grace and in it. So when I was teaching in DC, I got to know Holy Cross. It was a brother school, and I got to know Holy Cross even better from a different way than the Notre Dame experience. And so I began discerning a call to join Holy Cross and to come back to Moreau Seminary, which I did. After 4 years teaching, I decided, okay, I'm going to give the seminary a shot. And that was an awesome experience. And to this day, Holy Cross guys are some of my best friends and just a huge influence on my life. And I always say, I mean, Jess is here smiling too. For me, honestly, it was like 50-50.
Right.
Like, you know,
I could have seen it going both ways.
And so I went to the novitiate, came back, and then I was in temporary vows. And then I decided, okay, I think I want to leave and explore dating and that. But I was thinking maybe I would come back. But I was like, well, now is the time to explore that. Yeah. And that was when I really fell in love with Catherine. And both of us shared, I know one of the things you probably talk about is mentors. Both of us shared having been really mentored by Mike Baxter. And she was out at Andre House in Arizona and then had went to Casa Juan Diego in Houston. I had learned Spanish in Guatemala while I was in the seminary, and I went down there with Neil Wack, and one of us came back able to speak Spanish. Sorry, Neil.
He would appreciate that.
That's right. So anyway, we shared kind of this. Both were really drawn to the Catholic worker movement, and so then she moved to South Bend, and we both were part of the St. Peter Claver Catholic worker community here in South Bend. That Margie File,
and former podcast guest,
the great Margie File, and Mike Baxter and Ben Peters, another Notre Dame blast from the past, started. And so we were part of that for probably 4 years, right up until 3 or 4 years, right up until we got married. And so we got married in 2007, and we moved into a neighborhood and in South Bend, the near Northwest neighborhood, and all kinds of great things, getting involved in the community. I had begun working at Holy Cross College and was teaching there, was starting, and then about to start the PhD. But for Catherine and me, we were very involved in the community, and in some ways, she and Jeff probably share a lot in common in terms of like just the dedication to faith and the ways in which Jessica benefited from that with Jeff, I too with Catherine. And so we were starting our life together, and then the kids came. So Benedict in 2010, and then Basil, who had a 1 in 735 chance of being named Basil because we didn't know if it was a boy or a girl, and he happened to be born on January 20th.
Okay.
Otherwise, I think he regrets it. Otherwise, he would have been a Leo, so we would have had a name for the Pope. But you can't go wrong in this zip code with Basil.
That's right.
Anyway, and then in 2016.
17.
Well, 17. No, I know when Mimi was born. I wanted to get this in there. So Catherine in 2006, I mean, I was no spring chicken. I had been in the seminary, so we were a little bit older. And Catherine went on this great tradition in the Notre Dame world, I think, called the Awesome Women's Retreat. Okay. So most of them Notre Dame grads, like Catherine was, and she came back and she told me, she's like, I think I want to have another baby. She kind of got caught up in the spirit of these big families, which I appreciated having come from one. So along comes Miriam in 2017, and then just within weeks came, it's similar to how Jess shared with Jeff, then came the pain and the emergence of cancer. So it was just weeks in. I can still remember Catherine would often, in the middle of the night, go into a different bedroom and nurse Miriam, and her side started to hurt. And this is 3 weeks. Miriam is just a newborn, and so she was having a lot of pain. And also similar to Jeff, we get it checked out, and at first you're thinking, okay, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And going through my mind right now are the names of all the things we thought and hoped it was, and it wasn't. It was cholangiocarcinoma, the same disease that afflicted Jeff. And in some ways, one thing that Jess didn't share is he had been a triathlete and is in great health, Catherine in great health, and it's just like there it is. And so she was diagnosed in November of 2017, and that was obviously very, very difficult. And she continued to nurse Miriam. And then I'll just share one more story of that chapter of we were at the hospital getting a radiation, that Y90 procedure done in Chicago, when she realized that she was going into a surgery that the medicines, she wouldn't be able to nurse Miriam anymore. And so that moment I'll never forget too, of a mom of a daughter barely 3 months old, nursing her for the last time, and then going into treatment and then chemo and everything. And so, one of the things in that chapter was realizing the power of this community here in South Bend. She and lots of greats, Kelly Klee and others, got together. And so Miriam, for about maybe the next year, I don't even know, was fed on the breast milk of countless women who donated their breast milk throughout South Bend. And that was something that really had great meaning for Catherine. And I think it just in faith that still has great meaning for Catherine, of the community that she is a part of. But though that led to the years of the cancer treatment and navigating all of that with the young kids, and then she died on July 13th. It'll be 5 years.
Wow.
And so that is a very painful, but also Catherine is extremely faithful. And I think still that will unfold for many years. I felt like I woke up each day with a 2x4 being hit across my face. But that was obviously a very, very difficult chapter.
Yeah. Well, in hearing a lot of people's stories, it's clear, like, we don't choose the suffering.
Yeah.
And yet, in the midst of suffering, sometimes we see these hints of God's grace, the community surrounding, giving of their bodies to feed your daughter, an amazing aspect of that. But I'm sure there were many, many others. Just for you, as you went through Jeff's final months and weeks in death and the aftermath, give us a sense of both the burden of that cross, but also if there were some of the moments where you saw hints of God's grace and help through other people, or moments that you had.
Yeah. Well, Jeff's sickness was just so fast. So he went to the hospital on April 14th, and he died December 14th of the same year.
Wow.
So everything happened so fast. And when I was grieving in 2019, I went and I printed out a calendar of 2018 and went through all 8,000 pages of his medical records from University of Chicago and just tried to understand, like, what had happened. And I know it was so intense. I figured out that he spent 55% of his time in the hospital. So it was usually like every other week he would be downtown, and it was at least an hour and a half drive. And anybody from the Chicagoland area knows there's no good time to drive from the suburbs to the city or back.
Right.
So yeah, I guess I knew God was there, because man, was I mad. And I understand the naivete of this now, but I thought, I have done everything I'm supposed to do. I have...
Even New Year's Eve Mass.
Yeah, right? Even New Year's Eve. And he, more importantly, he has done everything he's supposed to do. Yeah. And God, I thought, I'm being cheated out of the life that I didn't have as a child.
Right.
And the same thing is replaying itself in it's rhyming with my childhood. And on one hand, I could see how my childhood could prepare me to talk to my kids about a fatherless childhood, but also I was just so mad. And I used to wake up in the middle of the night and just cry. Most of the time, Jeff was in the hospital, or if I was up in the middle of the night, our kids were so little. Kate was 2 and Jake was 3. Jake had reactive airways disease and needed 3 nebulizer treatments a day. And Jeff had the antibiotics at home, and I distinctly remember one time Kate was going to bed and she got sick in her bed. And I feel like any parent listening to this podcast is going to be like, yep, I had to like take the comforter outside, shake it out, right? Strip the bed. And then, but meantime, my husband's downstairs getting IV antibiotics that only I can administer because nobody else has learned how to do it and nobody else is home. And so then I'm like, okay, let me prioritize the child. And I put Kate in the shower and got her. And then I'm like, okay, now let me. And I'm like, Jeff, you're just going to have to wait. Like, I can't come down there. Right. And all of this. And then I knew that I was going to be getting up like 4 hours later to either help him or a child. It was like having 3. It wasn't, I don't even know what it was. Yeah. And yeah, it was so unbelievably difficult. And when he was in the hospital, I just would wake up and just be so angry. But I always knew God was there. Like, I never felt abandoned or alone. And I knew that there was no amount of anger I could have that would make me feel alone.
And that God could absorb that.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. And we had so many people praying. And I literally, you mentioned we don't get to pick the suffering. So Jake, my son, he said to me recently, he said, Mom, he's 10 years old. He said, Mom, sometimes I feel like the only reason I was created was to suffer.
Wow.
And I said, I know it can seem like that sometimes. It really can. And I was like, and there's nothing you can say to God that will make him leave you. And I said, and I talked about times in my life when I felt that way too, and how I know and I feel a little bit bad saying this, but, sometimes when people find out that we got together, they're like, oh, God redeems everything. And I'm like, I would give anything back. And I know Mike would too, to have Jeff back. Yeah. Like, I don't feel like it's been redeemed. Like nothing has been reconciled. It still is awful. We still live with it. Our kids still live with it. Death is very much a part of our lives. And also, like... And
blending a family is not exactly a fairy tale.
I know. People are like, oh, you got married and you live happy ever after. It's like, no, that is just a new level of difficulty.
Still carrying the cross.
And I love Mike and I love Benny, Basil, and Mimi. And all of that is true with the same level of, oh my God, this is so hard. And I feel like the only reason I can still be doing this is because I have a very strong sense of this is what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. And I don't think we would have lasted this long. Our first year of marriage, we were like, was this a huge mistake? Have we screwed up our kids? Have we screwed up our lives?
But God's grace.
Yeah.
See, that's what's so remarkable. I can hardly breathe, honestly, just thinking of the depth of suffering that both of you, your spouses, your kids have been through. And I just think, but for God's grace, could we all be sitting here having this conversation? And for whatever reason, not everybody goes through this level of suffering. Some people get to, we got to a ripe old age and we saw our children's children, at the wedding vows hope, and that happens. And it's still sad, but it's sort of like, this happened at the appropriate time and we're on the journey to heaven. But for both of you, it's sort of like, a lot of this is out of order and the depth of pain is greater than what anyone could bear. So, Mike, as you went through Catherine's death and the aftermath, how did you find yourself clinging to God in those moments and just, surrendering to what was happening to you without letting go of that relationship with God?
This is definitely not how the playbook is supposed to go. And like Jess said, and I think in the time that Catherine was sick and after, in some sense, I think for me, the experience of some consolation in the midst of just an awful experience of Catherine dying was through when I was able to do two things, I think. As Jess was talking, the two things that came to my mind were to try and appreciate and live in the present moment in each day. There were some beautiful days that in Catherine's last months, and which were also the beginning of the pandemic. Right. And so I was home and there was a lot of simplicity. And so the consolation I felt is Catherine used to have a phrase like marking the time of whether it's the time of day through a prayer or the time of year through a feast day. And that has always brought me a great consolation, the ability to kind of like take the massive universe or massive pain or massive challenge and break it down and focus on the day and marking this time. And the other is I've always experienced God, especially through community and through others. And so for me, it's interesting that there's no formula. As Jess was talking about this, her kind of sense of God, sense of this is what you need to be doing. I have always had sort of my most deep experiences of God in some sense mediated by and through others. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, through meeting Jess and having that sense of God's gift to me is like the message of you are not alone. That phrase, you are not alone, that speaks to my heart. And it is one of the things that kept me going through Catherine's illness, her death, and then after that gift of walking the way of the cross together.
It's so beautifully put. So, Jess, let's get to that moment where you meet Mike. How did that happen? I assume there was this connection through this illness that your spouse has had, but what were those moments like, and kind of what was the surprise about this blossoming friendship and relationship?
Mm-hmm. So Mike and I actually met at a symposium at University of Chicago. So I was with Jeff. Jeff was very sick. So this was in October 2018, 2 months before he died. And then Mike and Catherine were there. Mm-hmm. And so we met at that symposium. And then we keep in, like, we knew we had each other.
Well, I was supposed to be your mentor.
I was going to leave that part out.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've heard about this.
Yeah. Mike was supposed to be my mentor, and he never called or followed up on it.
But for God's grace.
Yeah. So it actually worked out really well because the person in charge of the mentorship program became my mentor because she felt so terrible. And so she actually was able to help navigate us through getting opinions at MD Anderson.
Okay.
And shepherded us through that process. And he came to our wedding. She's a dear friend. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we met at the symposium, and I said, I think you were supposed to be my mentor. And he's like, oh, God. And
I'm doing my best here with these kids.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
Which, I mean, Catherine had a recurrence, and it's no wonder it fell off your radar. So that's how we met, and then Jeff died, and I think you found out through the Cholangio community that he had passed away. And then you reached out, I think, and said how sorry you were. And then, so that would have been in 2019 that you reached out. And then I started following his Caring Bridge site. And I think at one point, Catherine had a bowel obstruction, was it? Which is life-threatening. Mm-hmm. And Mike texted me questions that you can only ask someone who's been through this. He's like, now, was Jeff cremated or buried? Like, what did you tell the kids?
Yeah.
And that's its whole thing to navigate, right? Like my kids, they shoveled dirt on top of their father's grave. They asked to see his feet in the casket. I remember asking them, make sure you put shoes on his feet in case they want to see it, and I want him to be able to touch his body. So Mike, when he reached out, it's like, who do you ask those questions to?
Yeah. Only somebody who's been through it.
I mean, it's so macabre. So I started, kind of mentoring Mike. And then I knew that he had kids, so I sent some books that had been helpful for my kids. And The Invisible String, is the best one. And The Rabbit Listened is another really good one. But so that's how. And then Catherine passed away in July of 2020, and I came to the visitation at Holy Cross. And I remember crying the whole way back because I called my aunt and I said, I'm just so glad it's not me. It was really jarring to go to that. And I was sad, but also whether or not it was right to feel it, I felt relieved when I drove away. And then Mike reached out, I don't know, it was like maybe a month later, just as like, now what do I do?
Yeah, because that's the thing. I mean, this death and, people are trying to help you process it and they're grieving, but then they have the relief of removing themselves, and then the loved ones are left, and you got to make sense of it in the
have so many
days, weeks, months, years to come.
We have compared our situations in terms of, like, it's also very different. Let me put it this way. I had a different experience being a widow than Mike had been a widower.
Okay.
And I also was a widow. I mean, I'm still a widow, but I was a single mom for 2.5 years and through a pandemic and one thing and another. And there is no easy way out for anybody. Yeah. But yeah, so Mike called me. I'll get back to that. Mike called me in August and we talked for a while and we hung up and I thought, oh no, I think I like him.
I'm not sure I need this complication, but
yeah. And I remember going over to my friend's house, and I was like, I think I need to talk to you. And this is a dear friend who's still involved in our lives. His name's Adam. And I had dinner with him and his wife, and I was like, I mean, I can't like this guy. His wife just died. Like, I'm a monster. That's crazy. Yeah. And they were like, don't overanalyze this. It's good that you have these feelings again. And you don't have to make sense of this yet.
Right. And such an incredible, unique connection that both of your spouses had gone through.
I mean, we could talk about, like, we both know what a paracentesis is. We both know the different parts of a liver. We both know
the genetic mutations.
Yeah, genetic mutations of cholangiocarcinoma, and it is its own language. Yeah.
And for me, in terms of the widower, I had a lot of support. I think my own family, my big family, and then the other influence in my life and gift in our lives really now that I want to mention is Catherine's mom and dad. They had moved back here. He's a 61 Notre Dame grad, and they are truly saints. Now, of course, all during this time, Catherine's mom is praying that I would find somebody. And so she, after Catherine's death, and I think that for me, like, then when it would be 2 years before we got married, but in that time, I do think that sort of having gone through the same experience was part of that, a part of even the falling in love. Because, like I was talking about that solidarity or that sense of not being alone. I still feel that as I listen to Jess retell the story of not being alone. And that shared experience creates a depth of bond. I also fell in love with just the fact she was a teacher, to go back to the early part of the, and so smart, and the conversations. But thinking about when we were dating, there would be times we would get the kids together too, but it was a lot of time just us two. And so there's actually more.
We don't have that anymore.
But just like the shared Catholic faith, but then also just the shared intellectual curiosity and interest and vitality, and so that really drew me to Jess, and then deciding that we would make our home here in this community too. That's, I think, part of it too, is like feeling that support is still here for us. One of the greatest supports during all the time of Catherine's illness, afterwards, and in our lives now, Katie LaShawn, who's one of the leaders at ACE. We're having dinner with the LaShawns tonight, and John Paul, just amazing people. I think maybe on that chapter, one more thing to say is just that I remember the excitement. I wanted to tell people about her. And then after we got married, to be able to be here in this community. So I think that for me, like, that sense of connection was very strong because of our shared experience, but then also this new chapter that was opening up.
Yeah, and it also strikes me that it's one thing to go through suffering in your own life, but I think as a father myself, when I see my kids going through suffering, that's hard. That's hard. I mean, it's hard in any life. And I can only imagine trying to help your kids through all this roller coaster of emotion of losing a parent, but then a couple of years later, having a step parent come into your life, and then these other kids who weren't part of their lives, and now we're going to try and make it together. As you said, that's not an easy thing.
It is not. I do not advise it.
Yeah.
If you can avoid it. It is. I want to speak to, and maybe you weren't going there, but I want to speak a little bit to how we ended up here in South Bend, if that's okay.
Please.
Because we weighed different options. I did not want to leave my job. I loved it. I helped open that school, and I really felt strongly about what we were doing as public educators. And then I met Mike and I thought, well, I have just gotten my life figured out. So I don't know if you fit in here. You can decide if you want to move here, but I'm staying here. And I had family close by. So my late husband, Jeff, was from Naperville. We lived in Aurora, and my mother and father-in-law live in Naperville still, in the house that Jeff grew up in, and are so involved. And then my sister-in-law, Jeff's sister, lived 5 minutes away with her kids, and her kids and my kids were very close.
Yeah.
So there was not a lot of incentive for me to want to pick up and move my whole life. So we started doing this pro-con thing, and finally, I don't know who, we talked about Indianapolis, which is where my family is. We talked about here, and we talked about where I was living in Aurora.
Did we talk about St. Louis? No, maybe?
I don't think we did.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we kind of played out where would you work, where would I work, where would we live, and where would the kids go to school?
Yeah.
And we finally came to frame the question as less of what are you giving up in this points and keeping score, and we framed it as where do the 7 of us have the most room to grow? Where do we have the support to grow?
What a great question.
And it was a very easy answer. And I wasn't real thrilled about it. And this is another, because I left, I didn't have a job here, and I love teaching. It definitely feels like a vocation. I love teaching in the writing program, and I'm adjunct. It's an interesting, I was worried when we came to South Bend that I would be a stranger among my own people.
Yeah.
Because I'm not a Notre Dame grad, because I don't have a PhD. And it's interesting, even as I hear Mike talk, my father-in-law's a 61 grad. I mean, and that's...
All these domers.
Right,
yeah.
right. I didn't even know what the term domer was. And Mike was like, what do you mean an outsider among your own people? And some of that has played out, and most of it has not.
Yeah.
And he's mentioning Katie. Katie and I are very good friends now. I feel like, so Jake and Kate will sometimes miss home, which they still think is Aurora.
Sure.
And I just empathize, and then when the time is right, I try to mention that my life is better here. I feel like our lives were very siloed. I had work, they had school, and we had church. And now it's enmeshed. And I do feel very much like God was at work bringing us here. So that it was a little bit of a circuitous path to getting here. And I'm so glad that we are.
Yeah.
Mike, what would you share about that decision?
Yeah, I'm really grateful for it too, because one of the things that we talked about was like the school, and just the sacrifice that she made is enormous. And it's a good practice for me to continually recall that, of the sacrifice of leaving an amazing job and an amazing situation. So one, there's a response of gratitude. And on the school, I think part of it was the prospect, which happened, of having all of our kids at Holy Cross School, which is a place where we deeply resonate with the values. My stepdaughter, Jess's daughter, Kate, went into first grade into a Spanish immersion class.
Right.
And knew not a single word
And
of
had
Spanish.
not a single word. And now is with the top of her class, flourishing. And just the courage of Jess and of Kate to do that. And that was the values that we are still trying to live out, of what kind of had taken place at Holy Cross School, which, by the way, people like Katie LaShawn and Annie Borjas and Claire Roach and others made happen, Luis Fraga, but was also basically Catherine's idea of having this Spanish immersion program. And so that's what comes to mind. Another thing that comes to mind is, from the perspective of faith, was a moment when we got married. We chose to get married back in St. Louis, where both of our families originally are from. And but the priest was from here, Father Jim Fenstermacher, who's the pastor of Holy Cross Parish. And I definitely have leaned on the fact that in the midst of the sacrament, feeling God's presence, that this is the right step. And so blending a family, it has been and is very hard. And sometimes you hear a phrase like leaning on the sacrament or on grace. And that, for me, has been really important, to know that, like, in that moment, the feeling God's blessing, every day seeing God's goodness in Jess, and then taking one step at a time. And so for me, like that, that's what I recognize as Jess's sacrifice of moving here, but then also the way the church has been there and has blessed what we are doing.
Yeah, and sometimes we talk with married couples about when you're young and newlywed, like not really knowing what the vows really mean. And yet, here you've both been through the passion, death, resurrection. I mean, all this, like you've been through this whole thing with two other people, and yet you're coming here making these vows again to this new person with a lot more life, a lot more wisdom, a lot more knowledge. What was, Jess, for you, what was that like?
Yeah. Well, I remember Zooming with my two oldest and best friends after Mike and I got engaged, and they're like, we want to hear the story. And I just started crying. And I was like, I don't know why I'm crying. I mean, this is what I want. I feel I have all these feelings. I don't even know what I'm feeling. And my friend Tiffany said, if we had any idea what we were getting into in our 20s, we would have all been crying.
Yeah.
And so it was so wise and just normalized those feelings. I know. And part of getting married again was also like, one of us is going to have to bury another spouse.
Yeah.
And I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up.
Right.
I have such a strong sense of, even if I wanted to figure things out, I don't have enough information to do so. I don't know what life's even going to be like really in a year. And B, I don't have to. I don't have to be in charge of figuring this all out. And I wear a bracelet that's a rosary wound up. And I swear, anytime that life seems overwhelming, I just stop and I say a couple beads. And it is, it's hard.
Well, I think it's a great connection to Mary. I love that idea of the rosary because her life was also
I think about Mary a lot.
So unexpected. And you think about Our Lady of Sorrows and all that, and yet it was her surrender to God's will and what God accomplished through that. I think that's a good segue for us to talk about holiness, about the models of holiness and the methods that have helped you seek a holy life. So I'll ask both of you, gosh, if you could whittle it down, because I think there's so many, your lives have been so ripe with these moments of hardship, but moments of beauty. Who have been the models and mentors of holiness to you that have given you an example of how to live, helped you live through some of these hard times? Anything like that you would offer?
Yeah, I think as I listened to Jess talking about our decision to get married, one of the things that it comes to my mind was the words of a Holy Cross priest as I was talking about the decision to leave the seminary, then to get married, and he said, decisions, choices. We're so delusional if we think we're sitting here making all these decisions, like life unfolds. And so for me, I think, as I'm self-reflecting on us telling our stories here, it is that sense of in the moment of God is always giving us the opportunity to step forward, to do good, to experience joy, and to give love. And for me, I think the models of holiness are a few. One, my mom is a model of holiness who obviously with 8 kids, nothing came easy. And I think though more in my life, especially from the days here at Notre Dame, a couple of models of holiness, Joe Ross, who is that rector in Morrissey Manor that I mentioned, and then Mike Baxter. And for them, the mentoring, I think, was really more in understanding the social mission of the church and the opportunity to be a part of it. I think on the sort of the personal, more spiritual, I'd say Bob Kloska has been a mentor, and Jess of the Marian devotion I see in her is so much more than anything in a PhD program or anything I would have ever read. Just that in the day-to-day, turning to Mary and saying, okay, help me to ponder one more thing in my heart or just to keep going. And so I think that those, Bob and Jess, who she joined as our first or second year of marriage, a rosary group with Bob. And I think that devotion of just the daily walk. And that's where you come on a podcast like this, Holiness, as you mentioned, even before we started, Dan, of there is a sense of, oh my, no, I'm not holy. And I feel like you're brought to sort of face the ways in which each day I don't mark the time or I don't practice the spiritual practices I want to. But I think that Jess and Bob are people that always give me the hope that, okay, it's there for you, that going deeper with prayer. And that's been really powerful for me.
Jess, how would you respond to that and share with us some of your own mentors?
Yeah. I don't think I really realized any sort of mentorship was happening until maybe my 30s. I felt like my faith was something that I had to do. It was another thing that I was on my task list.
Obligation.
Yep,
Right,
yep. And so it wasn't until really I saw like Jeff's dedication to and conversation with God, how that was really an important part of our marriage and how we were raising our children. And then when my grandma died, that was a pivotal moment. I remember thinking, like, I just want to know where she is. I just can't picture where she is. And that kind of started what I would say is more of a conversation with God. And then I was able to reflect after she died on how my grandmother mentored me in my faith. And that was a pretty pivotal moment for our whole family. My Aunt Lisa, who's a mentor for me now, and was in that house as I was growing up, she had a moment where she was really angry with God that my grandma had died. And she, as she tells it to me, she thought to herself, if I want a relationship with God, I have no relationship is one-sided. It takes both. And so she realized, she felt like God had left her, and she was like, no, actually, like, I'm the one who needs to make more of an effort. And watching that and listening to her reflect on it was also really important to me. And then meeting Mike, and it's like Mike has all of the knowledge of kind of the things that seemed intuitive. And so like thinking, oh, well, that's why that's that way. Or, and I came to understand through conversations with Mike that I could be a participant in my faith and be in conversation with it, and not just a recipient of it, that it is alive. And so that changed everything. And so my grandma's death, my marriage with Jeff's death, and then meeting Mike. And those things all happened in my late 20s and until now. And then I was able to see like how, and this is what I always talk to my kids about, they do not love going to church on Sundays. It is, oh my gosh. And one of the things that we talk about is, I'm like, there's something you don't know, ask questions. When we first started going to church when they were little, it seemed really violent. They're looking at the stained glass windows like, why is he bleeding? And it's hard to explain. But it's important to me that they, even no matter what happens with their faith journey, that they know that they have something to come back to. And that there is this formative phase in their life that is part of their identity. And I realize now that's what I had. I was able to come back to that, even though it wasn't important to me at the time. And there were years, a decade, where it was not important at all and not a part of my life. And now that's just totally different.
Yeah, the patience of God is unmatched. How do you, as a final question for both of you, how do you pray together now? And how have you found that you built each other up in holiness, in this reality that you wouldn't have chosen, but it's the reality that you have and the reality that you're trying to make the best of? How do you pray together? How do you build each other up in holiness?
Yeah, I think probably the best answer to that is, the most honest answer is not well enough, but we do pray as a family. And I think one of the times where we were as a family first, and then with the two of us, was doing, and we haven't done it recently, but when we would do the Saints book and at dinner and talk about the saint of the day, that to me was like, that's kind of what it's all about, right? Is really sort of, as you said before, like participating in the story. And Jess and I will also, there's been a number of different ways that we have connected, just the two of us, when the kids are in bed or we find time to talk, to pray together. I think that it is when we go to Mass together, I think that those are times when I feel most connected to her. But I would say with blending a family of 5, that's one of the challenges and the real calls. Even a podcast like this, is it for me, being someone who's on this podcast, is it a reflection of holiness or a call to more holiness? And it's both. Yeah,
I feel that every
I don't
time.
know. You feel that welling up of that desire of wanting to do more and do better. But
Yeah, we go to church together, but even that is a little bit of a battle.
Right.
Yeah, I get more out of reading Faith ND and then going to church. And,
Thanks for the plug.
Yeah. I get a lot out of Hallow, and I use the kids and teens section and we discovered this through trial and error, and this is still kind of fraught, but I put Jake and Kate to bed, and Mike puts, Benny, Basil, and Mimi, but Mimi to bed.
Sure.
And so I just go to the kids and teens section and I let Jake or Kate pick what they want to listen to. And then there are different things, like there's kids stuff during Lent and Advent that's really awesome, where they do even just read a verse or two and then talk about it on the app. And it's awesome because it's not coming from mom.
Yeah.
And so I'm just there, and every time we end, I'm like, see, I told you, but I can't say that. So I'm just like, okay, you want to talk about it? No? Okay, that's fine. So I think I do more prayer by myself. Like you mentioned Our Lady of Sorrows earlier. So when I'm really overwhelmed, I go to the chapel at Stinson Remick and pray there. Yeah. And I feel very much like I went there worried about one of the kids recently, and it was the reading where Mary Magdalene Jesus is talking to her, and he says, "Stop holding on to me." And I just felt through prayer that I'm like, that's God telling me to stop hanging on so tight. And I left, and I had such a sense of peace about what I was worried about. You don't have to hang on tight to this.
Right.
I can do that for you.
Yeah.
And come to me. And I did. And I left. And so sometimes Mike will want to pray together. And sometimes I'm like, actually, you're being too loud.
Right.
I can't hear God.
That's a shocker. Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess this kind of speaks to the different kinds of prayer.
Sure.
And maybe in different seasons of life, how we need different kinds of prayer. And a lot of times right now, I just kind of want to be alone. I pray over my kids at night. I imagine this. I say the Memorare, which was my grandmother's favorite prayer, and I pray the Fatima prayer and the St. Michael prayer. And I picture this golden sparkly blanket going over my children to protect them. Just the other day when we were in the chapel underneath the basilica, Kate and I were praying, and we were looking at the Mary statue, and she has her mantle, and I was like, anytime I feel worried, I just imagine her drawing me close and wrapping that around me. Yeah. And I don't always love having prayer with other people. Sometimes I just need it to be me.
Sure.
One other thing, too, about that question, too, of not just prayer, but building each other up. One of the things that I was thinking that we do well, that Jess and I do well together, is affirming the other's goodness. Obviously, with blending the family, anybody raising kids, it's hard work. And so I do think part of it is that commitment to reconciling if there's a difference of opinion, or we do that well. We think of the St. Thomas Aquinas, grace perfects nature. And for me, there's a strong spirituality of just the goodness of nature. And I find myself leaning on that a lot if Jess and I if we're going through something of just this, really, as you can see, just what we talked about, just the goodness of Jess and the goodness of each other, and letting that also be part of our everyday holiness of saying God can build on that. But I think it is, even just listening, it's just really, it's a call to me of just the multiple ways of connecting with God.
Well, and as the host of this podcast, every time I have people on, I get something myself to think, ooh, I could work on that, or I could use that in my own life. And I think other people who listen to that appreciate that as well, and just the variety of stories. I always thank people at the end of the podcast, but there's an extra depth of gratitude for both of you for coming on today and sharing so much of this. I think people will be floored by this story, but there's many, many bits of wisdom that I think people will pull from this. So just thank you for your time. And
thank you. There's one last thing I want to add, because I think the Catholic guilt can sometimes make us always feel like we need to be doing more. And I remember, so one of the things that Notre Dame has for faculty and staff is that you can request a spiritual mentor. And so I did. And she is a sister at St. Mary's. I would go there on a weekly basis, and I remember talking to her, and I'm like, am I doing enough? Have I done enough? I don't know if I have surrendered enough. And I said, how do I know? And she looked at me and she said, I think you already have. And it gave me permission to just stop and not because there is a form of being distracted when you're constantly like, I need to be doing this, I need to be doing this, I need to be doing better, I need to be doing this. And there is a certain amount of peace and therefore contemplation that comes with, this is okay right now. And I think that our stories, and probably many of the stories on this podcast, speak to the fact that God meets us where we are. And if we need to be doing better, there will be something that emerges. And I don't mean that we're passively waiting for a sign from God. I think faith is like driving a car without power steering. It's physically exhausting.
Right.
You'd rather it not be so hard. But if you don't keep pressure on it, you're going to go off the road. But if the thing that we're doing is turning to God in times of need, I think that will be revealed to us, and that it's okay to say, in what ways have we surrendered in ways that we've been called to?
Yeah, to let go and let God and realize our own human limitations. And gosh, all that you have both been through, to still be here and talking about this in such a beautiful way is, to me, a sign of God's grace and love in your lives, an encouragement for all of us. So thanks again for being on the podcast. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks so much, Dan.
Thank you.
All right, well, that concludes this episode of Everyday Holiness, a Faith Indy podcast. As always, we invite you to like and subscribe, rate, and share the podcast with others who would benefit from hearing it. Just mentioned our Faith Indy Daily Gospel Reflection. You can sign up for that at faith.nd.edu/signup. There you'll receive a reflection each day from a member of the Notre Dame family and be made aware of future episodes of this podcast. Thank you for being with us, and until next time, you'll be in our prayers. God bless.